Ojai Groundwater Management Agency regular meeting of July 28th to at 3 o'clock. Roberto, you want to call the roll?
Director Daddy?
Here.
Director Finch?
Here.
Mayor Sticks?
Here.
Director Thielke?
Here.
And Chair Hages.
Here.
Thank you.
Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the next item is Director announcements, comments, reports. Peter.
Well, I thought I'd share a little bit of news. We have recently leased a well from a private owner, and that's not so newsworthy, but the water is being extracted with solar energy. So 15 panels in the height of the afternoon. Pump is putting out about 92 gallons a minute. Starts slower in the morning and tapers off in the later afternoon. But I thought it's worthy of mention because it's the first time I've heard this from any kind of commercial water agency or public water agency where solar energy is being used to pull water out of the ground. It's pretty exciting to see, just to watch that water come out and where's the power lines, and it's just it's all solar and very, very economical to do that.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Jim.
Nothing to report.
Herb Sticks.
Nothing to report. Grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Bob.
Nothing for the community facility district.
All I have for Casitas is I hope you'll excuse our jams we're creating on Main Street, but hopefully I think it'll be worthwhile to get that pipeline.
It's moving pretty fast.
Yeah. No, they are. They're doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, general manager comments.
We can't have a lot of discussion about this, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. This just came to my attention. Roberta got it to me yesterday, I think it was. The county public works, Ventura County Public Works, has put out this notice, and essentially what they're doing, they're saying now with any new wells within the basin, that the applicant must submit an analysis from a qualified professional with determination that the extraction of groundwater from the proposed well is not likely to interfere with production and functioning of other nearby wells and not likely to cause subsidence. The second item will be that this agency would then have to provide a statement as part of approval that said the groundwater extraction by the proposed well will not be inconsistent with any sustainable groundwater management program established in any applicable groundwater sustainability plan adopted by the GSA and would not decrease the likelihood of achieving sustainability goal for the basin. So before we start signing off and saying this stuff, I think the board ought to have a discussion on it. And what I'd like to do is bring it back to you at the next meeting so you can kind of weigh in on this. It reminds me a little bit of I told Chair Hages that LA County a few years ago when I was still working and managing a water agency in LA County. So I should put that mic on. The county came in and told all the municipal water agencies, or all the water agencies in the county, that they had to sign off and said, okay, if you're going to approve a meter, you have to guarantee that it's going to get 100 years worth of water supply. And the water agency said no. And so all the agencies said, no, we're not going to sign that. You can't guarantee that. So it turned out the county relented and backed off that demand. I'm not suggesting we would do that here, but I still think this is a discussion that the board ought to have. And you know, you need to feel comfortable. We're gonna be having to sign off on these kind of statements when you approve a well permit. And so my guess is, tonight, we're gonna have to probably address this maybe a little bit with that permit that's on the agenda.
Yes.
Yeah, so we do have a,
new requirement.
yeah, because this was dated in March, late March. So I'm assuming, oh, and it does not apply to wells that pump less than 2 acre feet, so, which is good. Go ahead, I'm finished with that. That's all I have to report.
How are we gonna know?
Well, usually in the application, I think it states that the well owner is estimating their production. And of course, when we get the extraction statements, then we'll be recording that information. We'll find out, well, if they're pumping more than they said they did, then, you know, we're gonna have,
That's my question.
yeah.
They apply for 2, we grant, they take 5. We do what action? And anyhow, I know we'll discuss this, but we probably should put the remedy in here also.
Yeah, and I think that's a good comment, and I'd like Peter Candy to weigh in on this as well, especially related to what you just said, because if the board's already approved a well application, and all of a sudden it doesn't meet what the owner originally presented, then I think it's definitely not consistent with being, you know, a well that's going to be lower production.
Well, we are going to have additional conditions.
Yeah.
And it might be that the conditions and the restrictions and the fines and the limits are so high from a different source of water that they may choose to well pump. And it may also be that if they do have one, they lose one out of production. Again, I just like to come to the conclusion and the limits first.
Yeah, and when we talk about Senior Canyon's proposed well application, I've got a few more comments, because we did, I think Jordan and I and Chair Hages did speak with Mr. Candy regarding about that whole issue of requirements and standards and all, and what, you know, currently the process is ministerial, and we got to be careful we don't get into a whole CEQA process. And so we'll talk a little bit about that more later. I don't have anything else.
All right. Jordan, are you there?
I am. Thank you. Let me share the screen here for this basin status presentation. And we do have some input, as has been mentioned, regarding the what we're calling a decision tree for permitting. Really, how many of the permits are truly just discretionary? How many are ministerial? And at what point does one transition into the other? So I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. And ideally have a flow chart for that decision tree to follow for next month's meeting, but we'll get there. Today's presentation, I've titled it Recession as Expected. We've been hearing in the news about how the economy shrank by 1/4% or whatever it is, and people are thinking, oh, recession economically. But here in California, and especially in the summertime, and especially locally in Ojai, we see annual recessions of groundwater as the main portion of the basin is used for its primary output of extraction. So hence the title for today's presentation. 2021 to 22 water year, still no changes since last month. About 2/3 of the average annually has fallen on the valley floor, and 22.87 inches on the Nordoff Ridge, where the primary point of recharge is coming from. On the outflow side, surface water, we're down to about 5/100ths of a CFS as of our measurement this past week on July 25th. That's about 22 gallons per minute, or 31,680 gallons in a day. That's equating to about 3 acre feet per month by that metric. And on the water year to date, that's 396 acre feet are estimated to have been flowed out of the basin as surface water, exclusive of the major storm flows. That's where it's really getting much more higher flows and flashier flows. But those which we're able to measure while we're standing in it on this monthly basis have averaged 270 gallons per minute, or 0.6 of a CFS over the long term for this water year, or 396 acre feet. What does that look like in the on the graphic that we like to produce? Pretty similar to past months, and over the past year we've been monitoring the perched system, or the SWAZI, southwest uppermost saturated zone. And the key here, takeaway that we see this month, is how level the flow rates and the elevation of daylighting groundwater is at in San Antonio Creek, associated with that uppermost system, compared to the relatively rapid recession in the main production aquifer system. So in this graphic, the darkest blue line is the key well, or the Elrod well, where we have a logger recording water levels every 90 minutes. And the dark blue diamonds, where we've measured the static water level manually and confirmed the depth at which we're measuring this automatically. Now that water levels continue to decline or recede, hence the term recession, pretty linearly since the peak in April of this year. Now, the daylighting groundwater elevation, which is several tens of feet lower, like just above that 650 foot, between 640 650 foot mark, is really stabilizing. That's as we've seen in years past, the decline there is relatively stable. In fact, the water point at which it daylights is almost identical to last month. You'll see that graphic shortly. In the Key Well, we have about 180.36 feet to water, roughly 63% capacity, or 50,400 acre feet. Still about 8 feet above where we were at the nadir of the water year in December of this past 2021. Now, what's interesting is that we're in the most accelerated point of recession, where we see about 6 feet per month of decline, which means that by this time next month, we'll be at or close to last year's nadir. We'll see. Here's where that daylighting water was occurring in the past months, and today it's almost the exact same. In fact, I think our GPS unit is on the same boulder as before. You can see that that cobble there, that looks like it's almost concrete, is there in that same graphic. So indeed, our GPS unit is sitting on the same boulder, same point of daylighting as last month, despite the 6 feet decline in water level elevation in the main aquifer, production aquifer system. It's still supporting some life, or in this case, mortality. There's a little bit of a crab or crawdad exoskeleton, at least, maybe even the whole thing, in the pond near just downstream from that daylighting point. Some feathers indicating life there as well. But again, here's a graphic showing that point of daylighting, or point of measurement, on the outfall from the basin, right at the basin boundary. This is from a couple months ago, and then last month, and then this month. Doesn't look like a whole lot of change. And the flow rate, in the sub 1 CFS and in the 10th of CFS rates, would expect to see something similar there. Montgomery Creek, a couple months back when there was some flow, and then last month, and then this month. Brighter with the summer sun, but dry with respect to surface flow there. Downstream from this area, there's the Creek Road Bridge in the background. Up from that today, looking dry as San Antonio Creek enters the upper Ventura River groundwater basin. Not much change month to month, same angle. But down by the confluence, you've got water flowing in the Ventura River, not much coming out of San Antonio Creek per se, but the Ventura River system, a much more live reach at this time. So one of the things that we talked about last month was getting in partnership with the Ojai Valley Sanitary District and going through their network of monitoring wells that they use, primarily for sewer line health and maintenance. They want to know where the shallowest aquifers are and how deep the waters are there to prevent both infiltration from the system, from the groundwater system into the sewer lines, and letting that water escape. And the opposite, when water levels are lower, sewer escaping into the southwest uppermost saturated zone. So they have this network of about 14 monitoring wells, 15 if you count the replacement well of 1.1 there. And some of these are active, some of these are not. And what we've done is been in communication with them to target water monitoring wells that we can set loggers in and then monitor at the equal frequency that we monitor the depth discrete monitoring well and the other wells in the basin. So in communication with them, there's about 4 of these that have been destroyed. Fortunately, one is right near the depth discrete monitoring well in South Fulton Street. That number 2 well that they've used was a monitoring well that has been abandoned for a few years, that we've now replaced with our Southern Fulton Street depth discrete monitoring well. All of these others, there's a couple that have been destroyed. Some are outside of the basin, but in communication with the Ojai Valley Sanitary District, they've given us the permission to set loggers in a handful of these wells. And the ones that we're going to be installing loggers in are number 6. They're on the far southwest side of the basin, very near the basin boundary, in fact, and number 10 up near the turn of the Signal Street, the demonstration park that's going in up there. Number 8 in Sarzati Park, and number 11 on a very slightly used street on the north side of town.
Jordan,
So
we have a question.
Do you have a question?
Are they all the same depth, or as you go, are they deep enough for us, or are they more in the...
Yes. Yeah, they're all deep enough for us. They all have a record of saturated perched aquifer system intersection and monitoring. And what having loggers there will do for us, they're all in the 15 to 25 foot depth range. So they're all perched aquifer system wells. These will all allow us to have a very key correlation of how the flow in at this area correlates to what we see at the in San Antonio Creek flow and the perched aquifer at the depth discrete monitoring well over a larger area, and then be able to pick those peaks and nadirs for creating a seasonal high or annual high and annual low, and really at any time, groundwater contour map of the perched aquifer system here, which was part of our GSP and part of our plan for a long time, actually, going forward. The beauty of it, of collaborating with Ojai Valley Sand, is that we don't need to drill any new wells for this. Basically, for the cost of the loggers, we get to put in loggers and then add this to our data set at a high frequency, which has proved so valuable elsewhere in the basin. And that concludes our presentation.
Any questions for Jordan? Thank you, Jordan.
All right. Happy to continue. I'll stay on and we'll participate in the remaining discussion as needed.
Okay, the next item is public comments on items not appearing on the agenda. Do you have any public comments? Okay, hearing none. The first action item is update on our groundwater sustainability plan activity. John?
And Trevor's going to
Trevor.
update us on that.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Let me share screens here. Actually, let me see if I can share. All right. Is it showing up okay for you guys? Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So as John mentioned, I'm going to give a little update on kind of what we've been working on over the past month in regards to the GSP. Primarily, the development of a response to comment letter from comments received on the GSP by the State Water Resources Control Board. I'll discuss a little bit about what the comment letter outlined and recommended in terms of GSP revisions and how we've prepared responses to each of those comments. And then I'm going to give an update on kind of what's to come in terms of grant funding. So last month, we talked about the upcoming Prop 68 solicitation that opens in October. and I'm going to go over kind of what the timeline looks like and what the next steps for the agency might be in consideration to that. So this is just a little overview slide, so let's jump on into the comment letter. So at any time, please stop me and ask questions. I'm happy to keep this a discussion. On July 1, the state board submitted a comment letter on the Ojai Valley GSP that made a number of recommendations, primarily kind of in relation to the representation of interconnected surface waters and how the sustainable management criteria deal with that. I've outlined the overview of what their recommendations kind of touch on in this bullet here. The response to comment letter was included in the board packet, and each of the comments that the state board provided include a detailed response. So similar to the letter that we helped the agency prepare for CDFW, NIMS, and the NGO consortium, the letter contains a plain language summary of what the comments represented, how the agency and what the GSP represents in terms of those different components of the GSP that were commented on, and then also an addendum that includes detailed and specific responses to individual comments. At a high level, what the comment letter recommended was revisions largely to how interconnected surface water are represented. So there was recommendations on using the Ojai Basin groundwater model for the development of sustainable management criteria for interconnected surface water, recommendations for expanding the discussion of aquatic habitat and GDEs in the basin, for reevaluating the estimate of sustainable yield to incorporate model estimates of groundwater surface water interactions, and expanded discussions of historical sustainability in light of those model predictions of surface water groundwater interactions. And then additionally, to kind of tack onto that were recommendations to provide more specific details on how and when projects and management actions would be implemented. So the approach that we have taken to respond to those comments is really to point back to the GSP. The state board acknowledged and highlighted the fact that the Ojai Basin groundwater model was used for the development of water budgets, for the development or an estimate of the sustainable yield. And what we point to is in the GSP, we note that the model estimates of surface water groundwater interaction from that tool are highly uncertain. We document that in the GSP and really we note that the surface water component of the model was not calibrated to stream flow. So it's a relatively unconstrained estimate of recharge, surface water, groundwater interactions, and kind of the larger components of recharge to the basin. We also note that the tool was appropriate to estimate what the sustainable yield is. So to generally characterize the influence of what a sustainable pumping rate would be in terms of groundwater elevations and groundwater and storage. And that's how we use the tool in the GSP. And we note in the GSP that the surface water groundwater interactions and the existence and prevalence of GDEs is a critical data gap that the agency plans to address through the first 5 years of GSP implementation. Additionally, incorporating again the model estimates of surface water groundwater interactions into the sustainable yield, we noted as not being appropriate at this time because the tools were not designed with, they didn't have enough data to really characterize that component of the water budget and what's happening in terms of model estimates for that component. We point to that, and then we also point to the fact that the Ventura River watershed model that's referenced in the comment letter as well. As a firm, we provided technical comments on that and noted that the model currently overestimates, again, the interconnection of groundwater and surface water. And the charts that I'm showing here on the right are really demonstrate that kind of overestimation of the degree of connectivity, where here we've got 2 wells. We've got Ojai Valley Imports monitoring well 1. We've got model simulated water levels shown in blue, measured water levels shown in black, and the land surface elevation at that well in this brown dashed line. And really what it demonstrates is that the model's predicting really large swings or fluctuations in groundwater elevations, where the model predicts again, during the last drought, we're still kind of in a drought, but the 2010 to 2016 period, the model shows groundwater elevation declines on the order of 100 feet. We don't see anything like that in the measured data at this well. Similarly, down near San Antonio Creek at well 4 North, 23 West, 12 HO2S, the model predicts a relatively continuous discharge of groundwater to land surface, as noted by the simulated water levels exceeding land surface elevation. And again, we don't see that in the measured groundwater elevation. So we point to really the limiting factor of incorporating these model results into the GSP at this time is there's some uncertainty in how these processes are represented in these different numerical models. And that uncertainty can be addressed through future projects and management actions that really are tailored to collecting data associated with these processes. There was a comment by the state board recommending an expanded discussion of how pumping has influenced groundwater elevations in the basin, and we note in the comment letter that discussion can be expanded in the 5-year update. And we also note that the GSP provides sufficient project descriptions to characterize really the agency's plan for GSP implementation and ongoing sustainable management in the basin. Excuse me. So at that kind of, the first ask would be a request that the board approve or provide comments on the letter. And based on the comments or approval from the board, DUDA can assist OBGMA in uploading the response to comment letter to the Sigma portal to again live with the other responses that we supported the agency in preparing and submitting to the GSP. I'm going to pause right here and happy to take any questions or move forward as needed.
Any questions?
So I'm just process-wise,
Mhm.
is everybody or all the GSPs receiving comments of this nature, since I know you're involved in a few? And how does this go with, getting it approved? And do we have to, is there multiple rounds of this, or do you have any idea?
So every GSP we've worked on has received comment letters. Other agencies have opted not to respond to comment letters that have been submitted after the GSP was posted to DWR's website. How that plays into DWR's approval, I'm not sure I can really opine on. But in terms of process, GSPs receive comment letters, and it's to the agency's discretion whether or not they want to prepare a response to comment letter. And really, I think that there's valid reason for the board to submit a response, because a lot of the comments have been discussed in the GSP. And I think the agencies, especially again with what Jordan just presented, has demonstrated, specifically with groundwater surface water connections, a commitment to better understanding these processes in the basin.
Is that it, Trevor?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, and I would echo, I believe it's appropriate. DWR is posted, we posted the groundwater sustainability plan for public comment. If DWR relies upon approval of our groundwater sustainability plan just on public comments or denies it because of the public comments, we should respond to those comments and try and help DWR understand why we didn't address things the way other people think they should have been addressed.
Okay, do we need an action to approve the responses?
I mean, we've asked you to do that. It's
I make a motion that we approve.
I do. As you know, I'm the alternate rep for the city of Ojai here, and Councilmember Wyrick contacted me Tuesday morning and asked if I could attend the meeting, so that's why I'm here. I'm grateful to be here. This is a super complex topic, and I have not had the time in the last 48 hours to adequately inform myself. So would this board entertain continuing the item until the next regular meeting to allow Councilmember Wyrick to vote, or if he can't attend, to give me the time to further research this question.
My concern would be, and Trevor, I don't know the closing date for comments on the groundwater sustainability plan. Do you know when that is? I think they gave 60 days.
Yeah, but there is an option, and this comment letter was received outside of that period. So
Okay.
regardless of that 60-day period, public comments can be submitted to DWR. So I believe that it's open-ended on when comments can be received. So I don't know if there's a strict deadline that we need to get these responses in by.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want to miss an opportunity, but certainly I understand where Director Sticks is coming from.
And I didn't get missed it somehow, so I'm also
Okay.
on hold.
Well, if you want us to bring it back, we can.
Yeah, if there's no deadline, I think that would be. I will say that the comments are pretty consistent with the comments that we've been dealing with for some time. So most of it is because we don't have the data to respond to your concerns, and the data gathering is part of our plan. So, but if there's no deadline for this, and certainly we can continue it.
I do have a question. 28 comments here. It looks like we're getting slammed on everything. It looks like asked and answered and asked and answered and asked and answered again. Are the comments coming back? Are they increasing? It appears that if we get 15 questions, we give them 15 answers, they come back with 28 questions. And so I'm just wondering, what in the world's going on here? It seems like it's expanding rather than closing things down, satisfying them. And it appears that they're asking a lot of the same questions over and over and over again in a little bit different format, which is, hey, we've got to perch water runoff into the riparian areas. And that seems to be overarching in here. And so I'm just concerned because it appears that it's expanding, and now we're getting into water rights, which I don't believe I've seen in any other communication before on item 28. And it says if a project would rely on existing water rights. And I want to make sure that when we read these, we really, really, really understand what they're trying to comment and ask us on this, because that is my big red flag concern.
Okay, if there's no objection, then we'll continue this to next month.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, the next item is metering.
Actually, a little update on Prop 68.
Oh, yes,
You have a little
please.
bit of time? Okay. So Prop 68. So what's coming up? So I want to talk a little bit about grant awards, eligible projects, and timeline and next steps for the agency. So before we jump into the eligible projects and the grant award amount, I want to just kind of provide a reminder to the board what projects were outlined in the GSP and described as being implemented within the first or assessed within the first 5 years of the GSP adoption. Really, we presented a table very similar to this. It's described in the GSP as well. So I'm not going to belabor anything here, but we have a number of projects that range from the development of a sampling and analysis plan down to the preparation of a GDE assessment. I will note in the GSP that preparation of the GDE assessment is focused on identifying potential sites for additional monitoring and the development and mapping of critical habitat and invasive species eradication plans. I will also note that this little asterisk here on the preparation of the sampling and analysis plan would recommend, and as a group, I think it would be important to develop this outside of the grant schedule because it helps inform and ensure the agency's compliance with DWR's monitoring and reporting schedule, and would help kind of implementation on a faster timeline than the grant is going to be implemented on. Overall, though, we're looking at a total cost of projects. Again, this is a high end, so numbers have been rounded up from the GSP of about 290 grand. Why this is important is round 2 of Prop 68 funding. They have a minimum and maximum grant award amount, and the minimum award amount is $1 million per basin. So the project lists that is noted in the GSP is currently less than the minimum grant award amount. So that would, based on this, I think we would encourage the agency to really reevaluate the project list and identify ways that the project list can be expanded to reach this minimum grant award amount of $1 million for the basin. And again, I think Chair Hages, you hit on the fact that a lot of the comments that have been received on the GSP have focused on and really hindered on the lack of data that is available in regard to specific sustainable management criteria. And so that might be a way that the project list can be expanded, is expanding projects or adding projects that focus on data gap reduction. In terms of the funding itself, the current PSP notes that local cost share is not required, but it is necessary to receive full points in the budget scoring criteria of the application. So the grant applications are competitive, but basins that did not receive funding in the first round or in previous Prop 68 funding rounds I think stand a better chance of getting awarded funding this time around. And then also important to note that the agency doesn't need to bear the cost of administering the grant. So built into the grant application, 10% of the total project cost can be allocated towards administering the grant. So that would be that would include development of monthly status reports, invoicing, coordination with DWR. That can be built into the grant application. So what types of projects are eligible if the agency's interested again in pursuing this and expanding the project list to reach this $1 million grant minimum? It would be activities that consist of the development of recharge projects. So we note in the GSP projects specifically associated with the San Antonio Creek spreading grounds rehabilitation project. And then also the potential to coordinate with, I believe it's the city of Ojai, for routing of surface water and surface runoff to recharge and perched aquifer system. So those are projects that can be expanded or expanded through this grant application. Projects that prevent and clean up groundwater contamination, projects that support water reliability, water conservation, geophysical survey or investigations to identify recharge potential. And then again, importantly to Ojai is our projects that fill in data gaps in the basin. So they help with revisions and updates to the GSP. And again, there is this language in the PSP that talks about addressing comments received from DWR. Because the GSP for Ojai has not received comments from DWR yet. These project components that fill data gaps would just need to be consistent with Sigma regs and the GSP requirements. So again, just outlining what has been discussed in the GSP. We have the development of a data management system, updated metering extraction, PD assessment, climate scenarios, and the focused recharge opportunities. Projects that the agency might consider would be expanding the GDE assessment to include installation of stream gauging stations and new nested monitoring wells. Those types of capital costs are definitely covered, and the kind of projects that fill in those data gaps are encouraged in this Prop 68. There also could be numerical model updates that incorporate the data that Jordan's been collecting over the last few years, and data that really is critical to understanding how surface water and groundwater interact and how they're modeled in the basin. And then also importantly, GSP annual reporting. So the costs associated with developing the GSP annual reports and submitting them to DWR can be included in the grant funding opportunity as well, or grant application. So what are we looking at in terms of timeline? Again, we discussed last month that the solicitation opens in October 2022. And we anticipate 4 to 6 weeks to prepare the application, submit it to DWR, but we've reached out to DWR to see if we can get a firmer deadline for when applications need to be submitted by. So this is why we're recommending the development of that sampling and analysis plan occur on a different timeline than the grant application. is because the final executed agreements will occur in September to November of 2023. So we're really looking at a year of review by DWR and communication to lead to ultimately grant funding to the agency. For round one, the work completion date was 2025. Again, since round two is pushed back a year, we anticipate that work completion date will be pushed back a year as well, but there's nothing specific in the PSP that notes that. We've asked DWR what this work completion date might be as well, and we will report back when we hear from them. So what would the next steps be for the agency? It would be, if the agency is interested in pursuing this opportunity, it would be developing an expanded project list. That's something that we at DUDEC could help the agency prepare and brainstorm on and develop ideas on how projects might be expanded. But again, that would be something that would need to be iterative and something that agency input would definitely be required for. And then one question that we had to DWR as well is whether or not eligible projects need to be included in the GSP. So for round one funding that we've supported other clients on, we worked with with the agency to develop project descriptions that mirrored what was presented in the GSP in Chapter 4, and then those were appended to the annual report. But if this is a requirement that DWR has, we could, again, help the agency prepare these project descriptions, and then we anticipate that the board could adopt those project descriptions to be amended into the GSP and become eligible for grant funding. Again, this is a question mark. We've asked DWR if this is a requirement. It's not specifically spelled out in the PSP. But if it is a requirement, I will let the agency know kind of as soon as we hear back from DWR. And after the expanded project list, it would kind of start laying the groundwork for preparing the grant materials to meet the October 2022 solicitation. So that's kind of a whirlwind overview of what's ahead for the grant opportunity. The most pressing is this minimum grant amount. We're currently looking at projects that are a third of that minimum grant award. So it will require some collaboration to expand the project list to really, I think, again, address comments that have been received on the GSP so far and implement projects that were currently identified in the GSP. And I'll leave it at that and happy to answer any questions.
Jim?
So, Trevor, I have
Yeah.
two questions. One, you mentioned, you mentioned the city infiltration project. Is it, would the city be applying for this also, or is this only available to the OBGMA/GSP?
I believe that the GSA would be the grant application. They'd be submitting the grant application, and then the coordinating agency would be the city on it. But the GSA, I believe, administers the grant.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So then my second one, I chuckled when you mentioned recharge facilities. Because ours is not functioning.
Yeah.
And, I don't even know, after meeting with the county twice or three times on it, that there's any plan, but I'm sure it's, a six-figure number to get it functioning. It's a built project that doesn't work.
Sorry, say that one more time.
It's a built project that doesn't work, and I mean, it looks like the way that's defined, that would be eligible and something we should put on it. And in that case, it would be the county. I guess we'd be the applicant, but the county would be the administering agent.
I believe still you'd be administering the grant.
Or whatever you called it.
Yeah. So everything would funnel, I believe, through the GSA. And then the different project components can have different,
How tight do budgetary estimates need to be for this in October?
I am not sure. That's something that I can ask. We have really great grant specialists. I can ask Jane Gray. She's the kind of expert on this in our group. I can ask her and get back to you via email.
Bob?
Trevor,
Yeah.
we went through that entire application pretty quickly. Do we have any underserved or disadvantaged components? They always have those components in grants. Do we have any special components that give us a little bit better chance or give us some money to remedy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to go back. They're discussed in the GSP. So off the top of my head, I don't know if there are disadvantaged communities mapped in the basin, but it's something we can definitely assess. And if there are groundwater wells that supply potable water to those communities, then a project that would address kind of preserving those groundwater resources definitely could be incorporated. I would have to, again, though, go look at the GSP to see what that mapped community maps look like.
And any idea, I mean, we all pretty much know the history about Matelaha and the gravity recharge pipe that was taken off in '85 to the basin, which was turned into a fire catchment basin because of the fire in the hills. And so I'm going to make a statement, Jim can correct me. So we haven't really had a steady stream of recharge into the lower aquifer in 35 plus years. And as I'm looking at that $1 million number versus a six-figure number, how much money would be too ambitious to go for? Because in our own website, we talk about the history where we were able to collect over 10,000 acre feet through that recharge system down through the perched, because we need to poke it down a little bit. So where do we go with this? This is a big project. A lot of money's been spent over half a dozen years, and with little or no success. So it appears that this is going to take a pretty good chunk of money to get through. How ambitious can we shoot?
I would say, so again, the min and max grant awards are between $1 million and $20 million. So the round one funding, those applications are published online, and the critically overdrafted basins, they were eligible for, I think they were guaranteed $7.6 million. So the applications for round one exceeded, I think they were up to almost $15 million. And some of those projects were pretty large projects. There is a technical evaluation component of the grant application scoring for the different project components. So I would say, I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I would say a project that is going to receive funding could also be, again, technically feasible. We need to be able to quantify the benefits to the basin. Yeah, so I don't have an answer off the top of my head. I don't think that, it just depends on the project, the technical feasibility, and the benefits that it would provide.
And then one last question to do the math. I think we're entitled to 500 acre feet of surface water. Is that correct? To put down into the recharge? 500 acre feet a year. Isn't that our allocation?
I think it's more like less than 400.
Yeah.
Okay, so 37 years of 400 acre feet that we've not been getting times the going rate is a pretty good chunk of money and a hell of a lot of water. And so I would like us to consider what we have been deprived on because of that fire when they disconnected our recharge system. I don't know who had the authority to disconnect our recharge system and why it was done, but we didn't get any water and we got no debris and we lost our recharge ability for the last 37 years. That's unfortunate.
Any other questions or comments?
Richard, I got a comment if the board's done. Couple of comments. After hearing the discussion tonight, I think there's some things I want to work with Trevor talk about identifying projects. As I recall, Trevor, and correct me if I'm wrong, within the GSP, over the 20-year span of the program, there was about $10 million of projects and management actions that were identified. And so I think we've got some of that already that we can look at and maybe expand what you've covered tonight to maybe get up to that $1 million amount. The other thing I think that came to my mind tonight was that when we talked about recharge, upgraded the existing system, or maybe partnering with the city of Ojai on some type of stormwater runoff recharge. And also maybe one that deals with water quality in the basin is partnering with Ojai Valley Sand District to maybe help seal some of the sewers. And so I think there's opportunities, not just OBGMA on their own, but I think there's some partnership opportunities that we should be looking at in the basin. That's all I have.
Thank you. Yeah, Bob, I would say the limit on what we can do is that 10% match funding. So we don't have a lot of cash. So if you get into the $10 million range, I think we're in trouble.
Maybe we can ask our supervisor to reallocate the wasted millions from Ventura, where we've not gotten a drop of water, to provide matching money. What are we, $6 million and not a drop so far?
Trevor, is there an established procedure for amending a GSP in any way?
There are, and I would say the GSP amendments are pretty involved. They kind of follow what would look like almost a quasi 5-year update, where you re-describe basin conditions. I don't think that has to be taken if new projects are identified. And that's something that we need to discuss with DWR, because what would be ideal is if we could write up project descriptions and based again on feedback from the board of what they'd like to pursue funding on, and that the board could just simply adopt a resolution to include the projects into the GSP, and that's that. But if a formal amendment needs to happen, that is an involved process, and it is outlined in the GSP regulations.
All right. So adding something would probably be easier than taking something out, I would assume.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Could you send John Mundy a copy of your PowerPoint slide?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you did.
Thank
You
you.
sent that to me earlier.
Yeah, I sent it right before the meeting.
I'll send that to the board if you want to see it.
Please. Okay, any further questions? Any public comments on the presentation? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move to the next item, which is our communication with our well owners.
Let me pass this along. Within the agenda package, I had put something, just a draft letter together for discussion purposes, and I did send it to the chair to take a look at, and the copy of the email that I just distributed were the comments that Chair Hages had relating to how we want to notify customers or well owners. I tried to give a little background in my letter. I didn't want to get into too much of the legalese and all the sections and codes. You know, people get lost. Even then, the chair says maybe it should be a little more simpler than that, which is fine. Certainly, the intent of my letter was to go to well owners without meters, and that's where I think our main focus is. And then certainly there's the whole discussion of extractions need to be reported. And then what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, and then somewhere down the road, and we've got this, I think, an ordinance that describes this, but there's also an issue as far as meter calibration and testing on an occasional basis. And so the board went through that several years ago, and I think that's codified in an ordinance, but we never really implemented it because we just didn't have the resources at the time. So I'd just like to get some feedback from the board, any thoughts where you'd like to go with this. We certainly need to get a letter out to those well owners that don't have meters, and we have a list in the database that we can produce for that, so that's not an issue. And we just need to get this done and get it out there. And then, of course, we need to talk about how we follow up and, and what happens if we can't get access, if property owners are refusing to do this and refuse to give us access at some point. So open it up for discussion.
I would agree with the chair. I would kind of like our initial letter to be really short and sweet. And I would like it to leave most of the legalese out if we can. I don't know that we need to cite and state our right and the rights given to us by the state of California. I really kind of think it's a matter of saying, hey, we have some rules in the OBGMA, and the rules are that you have a metered system. It's calibrated at a certain time. You must report. De minimis is something that is no longer valid, and there is a 1 acre-foot minimum charge per year per well. And if then somebody comes back and says, by what right of the divine king do you have the authority to do this? It's very simple. Is then you can give them the heavy-handed letter that says, you know, AB 7213 in 1963, fined by $1,000 a day fine. And you can put on all the heavy-handed stuff in a non-compliance letter. I would just kind of like to make it simple and let people know what the current rules are and that they should comply. And then to answer your other question, if you want to go back and read the minutes from 10 years ago, from the OBGMA, the minute meetings, you'll see the OBGMA discussed their enforcement was using the health department to inspect the wells. And that's the way that the OBGMA decided they had the authority to get on the property to do the inspections.
Any other comments?
I fully agree, just because there's been so much turnover that people might not know. So just a very simple, I think the ones with, you know, filling in the blanks like missed X quarters and the well number is great. But I agree that just a simple letter with the forms, and it, probably on the form you could let them, you know, fill out the date, or I guess they'd just copy it and do it. Well, they just do it for the dates because you won't know what quarterly. You just have to go off of what the meter says. I'm curious on your comment on the health department having any authority to look at a well.
My understanding for all drinking wells
Yeah,
is that they
that's the trouble. Most, you know, probably half of the wells aren't drinking wells.
I understand, but until they get out there and inspect it, they won't know. And they'll already be there.
Well, I think, Bob, we already have the authority to do that. It's not, we already have the authority to do that, to inspect it for being metered, and we just don't want to go there yet.
Yeah, and,
Be as nice as we can.
and I don't disagree. I think OBGMA has the authority. It's just a question of what happens if we can't gain access
Well, yeah.
voluntarily.
But I think
But we don't need to be
first
heavy-handed in
round,
the approach.
we have, you know, how many are there, 80? Or, no, it's more like 40, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 40
Yeah.
I think there's about 40.
Yeah, and some of them don't report at all. And those, I suspect many of those are wells that are not being used. They're abandoned, people may not know they have them. They should be destroyed if they haven't been. So if we could, draft one version of this letter to them, they may say, well, I didn't know I had a well. And if you put the recordation number in there, they may wake up to that. See if we can, get them to contact us. And then the other group are the group that report, but they don't have a meter. So if we can thin that out, I like to thin the herd before we start, trying to lasso somebody, and then see what kind of problems we're going to run into.
Okay?
Short, sweet, and collaborative sounds really good. Thank you.
Save that letter, though, because that's going to have to go out.
You might want it more detailed than I would put it together originally, but
Now, let's see what we get back.
let's see, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is, putting meters in, especially smaller ones, shouldn't be that expensive. I mean, a meter itself, maybe a couple $100, and I don't know what the labor's gonna be, but, I'm talking about a 1-inch meter, 3/4-inch meter or something.
I'm more concerned with the ones that don't report at all.
Yeah, yeah.
We can assume that they're inactive, but we don't know that.
Yeah.
So,
And the ones that don't have meters that are reporting, typically they've done that based on crop factor or
Right.
electrical estimates or something of that.
and they're
factor.
small.
And they're small.
Yeah.
And would this make sense when the sanitary district came out with that, my little rule about you're going to have your sewer line cameraed when you go sell?
Yeah.
My fault. They were nice enough to go find a number of plumbers where they could get these plumbers to come in and say, hey, we're going to do this thing for $100 or $125. So when the people go, where do I go with this? They said, hey, we've got a list for you.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Peter, I'm looking at you, do we have special agricultural field meter installers that are going to be different from A to Z plumbing? And if they do, maybe we can help out with 3 or 4 as a referral. I don't know who does that. I don't even know what a meter for a farm looks like. Is it going to look like the meter I have at my house? I don't know.
Similar.
And I'm not sure these people would either, but I'm pretty sure that there's maybe a couple of outfits that specialize in doing that, calibrating and repairing out there. So, if we think about it, maybe we could, let's just be as nice as we can. This is going to be different. And we're going to have people say, I've been here for 75 years, never been required, I've never done it, da-da-da-da, a little bit of entitlement. And so let's make it easy.
And as Chair Hages
When we
noted,
get into the when they contact us and want to argue with us, that'll be good, because then we can discuss some things with them individually. I mean, one of them is if they're concerned about their water rights, not reporting is a bad thing. So it just, I think if they contact, whether they're mad at us or whatever, getting to come out of the woodwork is the opportunity. Yeah.
and actually, I think Chair Hages would probably agree with this since he managed a water agency. Anybody that's got a small meter, it's probably not worth spending a whole bunch of money repairing it and
No.
testing it and all that. Just throw it away and get a new one.
Yeah, and they're good for quite a while.
Usually,
the small ones.
We found residential meters and municipal water systems a good 15, 20 years without a problem.
As long as they're not pumping too much sand. It's,
Yeah, that's true.
Typically,
That's true.
in the water world, meters are changed 5 to 8 years, every 5 to 8 years, somewhere in that.
Okay, anything else on that topic? Any public comments on that topic? Hearing none, we'll move to the next item, which is Senior Canyon Mutual Water Company well permit application. Adam,
Peter, did you want to make a statement first?
Being involved with Senior Canyon, I'm going to recuse myself from any decision here. Is it okay if I stick around?
yeah.
All right, thank you.
And Adam is the general counsel for Senior
okay.
Canyon, and been with us for how long now?
A little more than a year.
More than a year. Ooh, time flies.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Hages and members of the board and Manager Mundy. And as Peter mentioned, I'm Adam Kier. I'm general counsel for Senior Canyon, and I'll be presenting since Peter is recusing himself from this discussion. I know you're all fairly familiar with Senior Canyon, but just a brief summary. Senior Canyon has its own water sources, its surface water diversions, its horizontal well up in Senior Canyon. It has one groundwater well within the basin. Other groundwater wells or hard rock wells outside of the basin. That's not enough, though, to support all of Senior Canyon's demand. And so Senior Canyon also has to purchase from Casitas. That varies depending on the hydrology and the time of year. In the winter and it's wet, Senior Canyon can meet all of its demand from its own local sources. That falls off as you go into the spring, the summer. Last month, Senior Canyon was purchasing about 70% of Casitas water, 30% of its own. That's going to go up 75, 25 probably this month. Last year, we ended up 85% during the highest and driest part of the year, Casitas water. What we have been trying to do within Senior Canyon is trying to minimize our purchases of Casitas water by developing our own local sources. That's included on the books a rehab of our tunnel to try and increase that production. But we're also looking for other sources of local supply that are outside the Ojai Basin, and we've identified one promising location, and that's the application that's before you. This is in very close proximity to the solar-powered well that Director Thielke mentioned in his opening remarks. It's just on the east side of Senior Canyon's existing reservoir. It looks to be in a separate, almost like a perched bowl, a fairly localized bowl. We've looked at the drilling log for that adjacent well, which shows that it's primarily sandstone rock, a few layers of cobble. The static groundwater at that location has been, or was, around 20 feet below ground, so it's fairly high, at a fairly high level. And so that is what we're looking at. The beauty of this well and its location being outside of the defined Ojai Basin boundary, and that's as defined by DWR in their Bulletin 118, is that the water produced out of this well will diminish the amount of water that we need to purchase from Casitas. And as you know, that Casitas water is primarily coming out of the Ojai Basin. So with this approval of this well and development of this well, we'll be able to offset demands on the Ojai Basin, actually help improve the whole basin, Ojai Basin's status. I just wanted to also, maybe I should just pause there and ask if there's any questions about the nature of the well or what we're looking at in terms of our proposal.
I'm trying to pull up the detail online, because I guess the agenda doesn't include, or the agenda copies are not very legible.
If it's outside of our boundary,
It's in our boundary outside of the DWR's designated basin boundary.
Your jurisdictional boundary is greater than the actual basin boundary, if that makes any sense. So you have permitting authority for wells within your jurisdiction, even though they're outside the basin.
Did Senior Canyon, has Senior Canyon historically produced enough water to minimize their take from Casitas?
Again, it varies on the time of the year, but not to entirely remove ourselves from the need to purchase from Casitas. So that's been, I don't know, I will have to, maybe after we take action, we can ask Director Thielke for more information, but I think it's been for decades that we've been purchasing from Casitas.
Yeah, I know that, but it wasn't 75%.
I actually think that that our percentage has come down. I mean, yes, has come down in more recent years. That historically we were actually purchasing more.
When it rains.
May I make a statistical
you
comment?
give us some
In
information.
2013, Senior Canyon purchased 656 acre-feet of water from Casitas and produced itself about 40. And that 40 acre-feet, and that was ag. So virtually 100% in 2013 was purchased. Some of that was dysfunction in Senior Canyon in not producing water from the canyon that could have been produced. So it was problems, staff problems, those kinds of things were part of that. In 2011, Senior Canyon only bought 100 acre feet of water from Casitas. This past year, 370 acre feet. We have an allocation. We can only buy so much water from Casitas without penalty. And that's another aspect of this.
That's the
All right, thank you.
application.
But it's ranged, big range in how much we buy.
Does it depend more on weather or on the condition of your facilities?
More on weather.
Okay.
Rain.
A couple of other more housekeeping issues. I wanted to mention that the language that Manager Mundy mentioned earlier about the findings that need to be made for a new well within a basin that's been identified as medium or high priority. That's actually now part of law in that it was adopted as in the governor's May drought declaration. But there's some exceptions to that, and one is if you're outside the basin, which this well is outside a basin, but also if that well is serving exclusively a public water agency, then the groundwater management agency doesn't need to make those findings. So in your packet, I've included some proposed findings that include that particular reference.
Chair, is it okay to ask? A couple of questions. This seems unusual, but who knows? 4 people per residence is really pretty high these days, especially in this valley, and that's what this permit is looking at for water use. One of the things that I have heard, good or bad, I've just heard it. I don't know what the reality is. What kind of water line loss have you folks, are you experiencing? Because there was a time, maybe a quarter of a century or longer ago, that, the rumor was this is old World War II shipyard pipes just kind of glommed together, 4 or 5 different sizes and flows and pressures, and, not being a bad guy, I'm just, are we to the point where water line is stable, where we're about 1% loss, less?
That is a high priority of Senior Canyon. So we do have a number of leaks where they show up, and we go in and we try and as quickly as possible repair them. But we do have lines that really do need to be entirely replaced, and again, that's a high priority project of ours.
Ongoing. Industry-wide, what I know is that 10% is kind of typical for small water agencies, mutuals. There are 400 or 500 mutuals in California. We've done preliminary study about how much water, we know how much water we produce, and we know how much water we sell. That differential gives you opportunity to calculate what loss. And ours is probably a little bit above that. I would say 12, 13%. It's a continual process of replacing these old pipes. Because when you have a steel pipe in the ground, 4 feet down, it could be leaking pretty seriously, and you'd never see it. Nobody sees anything. Finally, somebody's walking their dog, and they see a little puddle. You dig down in that puddle, and you can find a 2-foot rupture in a pipe. So it's a continual thing that we work on to replace our mains and to replace, pipe anywhere in the system that has the old steel pipes in it. Mm-hmm. Problem is, money.
Always a problem. You said that there was an adjoining well and that the water static level was around 20 feet and that it was perched water. How deep do we think this, here's what kind of reminds me of. If it's perched water, it's just a little tiny water balloon full of water because it's perched and it's probably doesn't get redone, what kind of yield do you think you can have, and how is it going to, how are you going to monitor it so you don't drain that thing faster than it fills up?
Well, luckily, in this case, we're working with that adjacent landowner, so Senior Canyon's staff are monitoring that well daily, actually multiple times a day, taking the reading of the water levels. So it started at 20 feet static level. When that pump started, it started dropping, so it dropped down to around 80. So we're watching it, and because of that fairly quick drawdown is what is leading us to believe that it's a fairly localized bowl, if you will. So I think as we further explore, and again, we haven't even identified a precise location. As we further explore this, we'll get a better understanding of the overall yield from this well as the existing.
Isn't that well pretty new, 6 months or less, on something like 20 or 26 acres of avocados?
No, the well we're extracting from now.
Well,
least well?
We approved 2 wells in this last year, and that was one of them up in the east end. It was in the rocks. It was just outside of the basin. Hanson did the well, I believe.
Wasn't ours.
Yeah,
No, it wasn't yours, but I'm saying you're going to put yours in close to that?
No, that's a different well. This well was drilled some time ago, but it was because of lack of power.
It was drilled in 2002. This well's never been pumped.
All right, well, I had those mixed up. I knew we had one up there, and it was for 20 plus acres of avocado. I'm thinking you got a small pool and they got avocados. That thing's going like that. So what you're saying is it's available now because you can get readily available power.
We're using solar power right now.
Mike Cromer did that for the entire Rancho Grande, 300 acres up there, and he lifted 5, 6, 7, 800 feet based on solar.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay.
Are there any other questions?
Anyone have any other questions? Jordan, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, briefly, my comments to this are that this application has really, it sort of fits the model of someone finding an area outside of the GSA or GSA jurisdiction or outside of the alluvium to find an exemption to the moratoria. Although as a municipal water purveyor, Senior Canyon could potentially drill within that and still meet the some of the other exemptions of the various moratoria. That being said, even if you were to drill on this property on that which is mapped as alluvium and part of the groundwater basin, you're still going to have a bedrock well. There's very little saturated alluvium out there, even though it's mapped as alluvium. So I think the beauty of this project is that it's sort of opened the eyes of this agency a little bit about how different levels of permitting remaining within the ministerial definition exist. And certainly, as Mr. Keir mentioned, no relation that I know of, the agency boundary, the OBGMA boundary, the reach exceeds the grasp of the GSP and the GSA, the alluvial portion of the basin. So there's literally a gray area. Most of the time it's light brown, as shown on some of the graphics you've seen as part of this application, that is outside of the alluvium, but inside of OBGMA jurisdiction. That is, you still have to get a permit to drill a well in these areas from the OBGMA, but you're just getting a bedrock well. And that's certainly much more of a ministerial rubber stamping of permit applications like this, to my way of thinking, than something that would be in the center of the basin, a new source, not replacing anything, using more than 2 acre feet, all of those things that jump down the loop of the decision tree or flowchart that we should make for these kind of decisions. And Peter Canyon, I've talked a little bit about this, and John and I as well, about putting together for next month a sort of a flow chart of permitting for this agency. It may include a fee at some point, but we want to make sure that this is not that permits like this are indeed ministerial. It's pretty clear, and that if there comes a point of discretionary permitting where the agency has to make a decision about to permit or not to permit a well, because it's going to create something that's potentially an undesirable result in accordance with SGMA, that gets its full review and discretion by the agency. So my take on this is I'd recommend that the agency approve this permit, and that we have the opportunity to observe the location, make sure it's indeed outside of the basin boundaries and complying with the various moratoria, as well as have an opportunity to look at the cuttings of the drill rigs, the drill bores, any geophysical logs that might be run in the borehole or completed well, just because it is within the OBGMA jurisdiction to manage, and while it's still a bedrock well, there's clearly a significant resource there.
If I may, all of those conditions are fine with us.
All right, thanks, Jordan. Any other questions?
Within the agenda, one of the pages you can read is the last one under the Senior Canyon application, is attachment 4, potential findings that Mr. Kears put together, and you might want to take a quick look at that. I don't see any of that as being a problem for the agency. In fact, it really relates to all the items you just stated related to the exemptions and things like that. So I don't know if the board wants to include that in your decision.
If I may, in finding number 2, there's a typo. Bulletin 116 should be Bulletin 118. I apologize for that.
I have a question for the board.
Yes.
For the same reason that I stated in item A, would the board entertain continuing this item until Councilmember Wyrick can attend a regular meeting, or giving me the time to research this?
Yeah, I would like to take the findings that Mr. Keir provided us and maybe expand on that to cover this county regulation, to, formally state that we're not, the well is outside that particular jurisdiction and we don't have to meet these conditions. Maybe look at making it, we're going to run into this over and over again, so if we had some consistent set, and he's given us a good start. Is that a problem, the timing, Adam? Okay.
Did you hear that?
So it's on record. That another month would be fine. There's no issue of timing on this.
All right. Yeah, I think we might want to look at how we formalize this in a resolution or however that is attached to the application.
Chair, would we be able to bring this back next month with some type of
Yeah, I think
language where we can make it a firm decision, so we can allow them to plan and move on?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the work's done. I think we just need to formalize it a little more and add this new element to the county's regulation. Make sure that we understand it, that this well is exempt of that. Any objections to that?
Do we need a motion?
No. We'll just continue it. All right, thank you. Yeah, what's next?
I did want to mention real quick, we'll need to look at the details of this letter that the county sent out, because it doesn't seem to speak to, they do reference the groundwater sustainability plan adopted by the GSA. So again, as Chair Hages mentioned, this is out of the GSA boundary, but it's within the jurisdictional boundary of the OBGMA. And so I want to make sure we clarify with this so that we're on good ground if the county comes back.
Right.
And the question I guess I would have for Senior Canyon is, are you still gonna need to do the permit evaluation so that you can determine that the well is not impacting other wells and is not likely to cause subsidence? Because they don't seem to speak to that being related to the GSA, so I don't know if you're still gonna have to do that or not.
What I heard from Chair Hages is to, basically, this would be belt and suspenders, so that we have, we're exempted on one hand because we're providing exclusively to a public water system, but on the other hand, we meet all of these requirements anyway. So I can I can amend my findings if it's helpful and submit
Yeah.
those to you.
I mean, we'll do that, but because this does say the applicant must submit as part of your application, this analysis from a qualified professional. And so I want to make sure we understand, well, is that only related to GSA approved wells, or is that only related to, or is it related just to GSA wells, or do we have to do that for both inside and outside the GSA?
That's a question for your council, but
Yeah.
my interpretation is that it's only for GSA wells.
And I tend to probably agree with that, but this doesn't seem to indicate that.
Not clear.
Yeah, it's not clear.
Not clear.
So that's want to make sure, because if you may have to do that one way or the other, and if that's true, then we need to let you know that, at least from our interpretation. But I would tend to agree, this is really, I want to go back and look at the governor's order and see how that's, well, I've got this, but I just don't have all the detail. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yes,
Should be here next month.
and he's been working on this, so he's familiar with it.
Okay?
Yeah, it's not clear. I mean, it almost reads as though part one, if the county is the permitting agency, you would have to meet those requirements. But we can find out pretty quickly, and
Yeah.
let you know if you're gonna have to do anything else.
I mean, item 2 on the county's letter is pretty clear,
Yeah.
not
Okay.
item 1. Okay?
All right, thank you. Okay, the next item is the Treasury's report. John?
Just briefly, through June, well, at least for the month of June, we had $2,180 of income. We had $11,866 of expenses, with a ending balance of $25,922. But we have received an additional $35,000 in revenue in July, so, the bank balance is going back up, but, we're spending a lot on a lot of different activities, but we're keeping our head above the water, you might say. Major expenses for June were Cure Groundwater, Hollister and Brace, which is our legal counsel, and then payroll for Roberta. And I did notice there was an error on the extraction report. The last summary table at the bottom, all the numbers are correct, but it references fiscal year 2021, and that should be 21-22. So we need to correct that. But everything else in that bottom table is correct. So $114,000 received year to date, based on extractions reports submitted, just under 1,500 acre feet. But I'm sure that's going to be a lot more when we get the next quarter in. So that's all I have. Any questions, comments?
Any members of the board have any questions?
I have a question, and I think the chair brought this up a few meetings ago. It was mentioned that sooner or later, we're gonna have to take a look at our charges. And so, it was mentioned that sooner or later, we're gonna have to take a look at our charges. Mentioned. And so I'm wondering, like everything else, I'd like to get started early. And so I'm wondering how early we should make a determination. We want this on the agenda. So we can, get input, we can explain the rationale, we can come up with numbers. I believe transparency is always, absolutely needs to be crystal clear.
I think John's done some work already on it, so.
Yeah, we have, and I'll go back and look at that. It's the cost of service analysis that I've done, probably needs to be updated by now. And we will need to come back to the board and probably in September and ask you to approve a budget for the next year. So I think I'll try and get something put together next month, so at least gives you kind of a clue. But based on my thinking right now, and not with any scientific amount, but based upon our expenditures, I see the current fee structure needing to remain in place for a while, because we're going to have to continue to spend some money, especially related to meters. If we're going to do grants at all, then we've got to have money on hand to help cover cost until the grant money reimburses the agency. And so I'm not advocating raising the fees, but I think we may have to hang into it longer than we expected originally.
John, they were $25 an acre foot, right? The extraction fee, and
$25.
now it's 62 to
Right.
fund the GSP.
And $37 of that was related to the GSP.
Right, 37 of that.
Yeah.
So anyway, when you're talking about raising the fees, are you talking about raising the 25? Or supposedly after we paid for the GSP, it would retroactively go back to what it was? What do you?
Well, originally the thought was that we would recommend that we come back to the agency and the GSP fee would be either lowered or eliminated.
Okay,
That was the original thought.
yeah,
The $25 has to stay in place for at least basic operations. However, that
Right.
can't be raised because we're statutorily limited on how much the agency can charge under that fee.
okay,
So the question, we need to come back, and maybe the board will have to make some findings, and we go back to the GSP. When you look at that $10 million I talked about earlier for management projects, or projects and management actions, there's going to have to be a way to fund that, and that's all part of the GSP. And then there's continued work that you heard from Trevor today related to, projects that we're going to have to look at. And some of that, if we can get grant money, that'll help offset the revenues that we would have to expect from well owners. But there's just a lot of questions right now that it's, as much as I'd like to see that GSP fee go away, I think it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for a while to recommend that.
Jim?
Well, that 20-year financial projection or whatever was it never went down. It only goes up. So let's be honest with ourselves. That fee's never coming off. It's only going up. And, the 25 is, we can probably live with the statutory one because we have the other side discretionary now. So, and the director's fees, they're going up.
Yeah, I think the only way that we could change that
Yeah.
$25 fee, because it used to be 15, and we had to go back and have the state legislature modify the act in order to be able to charge that $25. So it would take an act of going back to the state and requesting to get that fee to be raised. But
Yeah, and I don't know how painful the wellhead fee is to the pumpers, but I asked Peter Candy, we have the authority to raise that. So,
yes, yeah, that's correct.
I think looking at the structure of the rates and make sure that the costs are distributed fairly.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, and part of the original intent behind the wellhead fee was to help cover some of the basic administrative costs of the agency. So it really wasn't related to the GSP.
Yeah, but, things like dealing with these unmetered and unreporting and
It's all work.
wellhead
Yeah,
fees should cover that.
we would hope so.
All right, are there any other business? If not. Oh, the treasury's report, I'm sorry. Oh,
add one more item, the board calendar.
Oh, yes.
Based upon what we've talked about,
We still need to approve the,
We have
Oh,
a
they-
motion to
I'm
approve the treasury's
yeah.
report.
I second.
He first did, I'll second it.
okay.
There you go. And call the roll?
Director Daddy?
Yes.
Director Finch?
Yes.
Director Sticks?
Yes.
Director Thielke?
Yes.
And Chair Hages?
Yes.
Thank you.
you.
Okay, now the meeting schedule.
Well, based upon the discussion today, I guess I wouldn't advocate an August meeting be eliminated, but certainly I thought at least we don't have to make a decision today, but you might want to start thinking about the November, December time period.
Yeah, what we've done in the past seems reasonable. If we can cancel one of them, I'm all for it, but.
Yeah, because they both fall on a holiday, so, or at least during the holiday period. The only thing I'll need to check, the agency usually does early December, that's why I put in there the
Yeah.
1st to the 8th. I need to verify with the city if those dates would be available.
Yeah, if we can do mid-November to get away from Thanksgiving and early December, that should give us time to put together some business for the meeting.
Okay, all right.
All right, if that's it, all right, meeting adjourned at 4:36.